Hi, welcome back to Self-Care as Medicine. And today we have a really special guest, actually one of my inspirations and one of the people that helped me get to this place of spreading the message of self-care as medicine. Because before I kind of came up with that as my mission, she has love as medicine as her kind of banner that she really gets behind. And so this is Razi Berry. Thanks so much for being with us, Razi.
Hi, Nicola. It's so great to be here. I'm so excited that you're doing this project.
Yeah, it's really fun. I don't. For those of you who don't know, Razi actually publishes the only naturopathic medical journal that we have as a profession, and is a huge ambassador of naturopathic medicine. And then has her own healing journey and support for lay people with the natural path. So she is immersed in the science and the research and the latest kind of approaches to working with all sorts of health issues. And then just really has been developing her own work on intuition and listening to yourself and really how to cultivate love. So I'm really excited to talk to you today.
I love it.
Okay. Well, why don't you tell me a little bit, why do you say that love is medicine? Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so, I was thinking at one point how, a long time ago we were dying from like infections, right? Consumption and influenza, and we were dying from all these infections. And then, we had some modern technology that was really good, and we eradicated most of that, better hygiene practices and things like that, and some medications that are important. But then we started dying from these diseases that I call the looking away diseases. So they're things like diseases of overconsumption, like diabetes, heart disease, even some cancers, autoimmune illnesses. And it's really all related to our lifestyle. Now, the word lifestyle has become like a word like Xerox or Kleenex that nobody really pays attention to what that is anymore. But one of the studies that shocked me the most when I was doing a cancer prevention summit was published in the Journal of Pharmacological Research. And it said that 90 to 95% of diseases and cancers were related to lifestyle, how we live, and our environment.
Wow.
And yeah, it's just like,
That's
that is
mind blowing.
like a mountable number. And this is in, a peer-reviewed, not naturopathic journal.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, it really is that we aren't loving ourselves and each other. And we're going to get into some of that today. And it's a lot of the work that you do, Nicola. But really, when we're not eating and moving and breathing healthy air and getting clean, fresh water and relating in loving ways with each other and over consuming and having toxins and adulterating our food with flavors and our bodies with scents, and just kind of disconnecting ourselves from our true nature, we aren't loving ourselves and we aren't loving our environment. And it was really naturopathic medicine, the philosophy of it, that brought me into this idea that love is medicine. Because like, I'm looking outside my window right now to a lemon tree that is just in full bloom, and it is sitting out there all day in the sun, all summer long. It's going to soak up the sun and the biofield from the earth that activates the soil microbes. And then in the winter, it's going to get chill hours. And it takes all this love from the environment and produces this beautiful fruit that we take into our bodies. And it's how we co-create who we are. It's like what we put inside ourselves. Whether it's through what we hear with our ears, what we see with our eyes, what we taste with our mouth, are ways that we love ourselves and stay in or move towards health, or how we move away from that, away from love and towards dis-ease. And so part of what I mean by love is medicine, of course, is about relationships, sexuality, attachment, which you are quite an expert on. But it's just the practical ways that we live and love ourselves or don't love ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. It feels like disconnection is such a huge part. It's like an epidemic at this point.
It is an epidemic. And, I'm guilty too. I realized that like every time I was going for a walk in the evening with my kids, I was bringing my phone with me. It's like, I was like, what are you doing, Razi? I wasn't on my phone, but I was bringing my phone with me because I'm always so connected, running a couple different businesses and being a single mom, and I homeschool the kids. And I feel like in some ways, rely on that to be connected. And it was like the last way that I was still like doing that. And so yesterday I just stopped taking it with me.
Yay!
I mean, like, it's embarrassing to say that it took me this long. But that's just like one of the last things that I just needed to do, really. And that was an act of love for them and for me.
Yeah. And I think that's such a cool way to think about medicine, is that, you know, even something like detaching from your phone. And I think a lot of us connect into technology out of a desire for a deeper connection, but it doesn't really feed that in the way that we think it could or should. And then we end up kind of coming back for more and more and more because we get the like, or we get the comment, or we get the whatever, the text, and we feel connected, but it feels really almost, you know, kind of instant and then almost depleting. You know, I read a long time ago the study that was showing every time we get a ping, there's a little release of dopamine. And so we're kind of, which makes us feel happy and rewarded and pleasure and kind of at ease in our environment. But I guess what I'm wondering is, if we get 100 pings of dopamine a day and we're not taking a walk with our kids to watch the sunset to replenish those stores, what's what's happening to our chemistry?
It's true. And I actually did a whole episode on my podcast on that. And so we won't go into that today, but you know, there's this new term now called online intimacy, and it sounds like it relates to online dating, but it doesn't. It's like how we really use this technology now as a replacement. And in some ways, there are some aspects to it that are good. There are ways that people can support each other through that. But overall, it is, as you said, using the word disconnect, it is a real disconnection for who we are as humans. I mean, even when you sit down and have, you know, a cup of tea with someone, you know, you're giving off your biofield and they are giving theirs off, and there's a sense of entrainment that happens. And you really do, your heart rate, as you know, gets in sync. And there's a communication there that is unspoken. Mm-hmm. And we're really lacking that. When I was growing up, my mom would have her friends over, and she would make, you know, chicken salad sandwich and sun tea in the yard, and she took her time. And I don't remember the last time anyone's ever invited me over for lunch. They've invited me out to lunch.
Oh yeah.
But just to sit in someone's home and, you know, drink from their glasses and eat from food they prepared is really a lost art. And or just like letter writing. Do you remember writing letters to people?
Yeah.
It was just, you know, it's like you're using that kind of functional connectivity of your movements and your brain, and you're putting your thoughts on paper, and then you're sending it across time and space. And there's this waiting period, and there's just this beauty about it. And I feel so sad sort of that we're losing some of those ways of connecting with each other.
Yeah. It was funny, when I was in New York a few weeks back, I actually found a stationery store, because it's really hard to find these days. And I bought a pack of stationery note cards just for that reason. I'm like, I want to start writing notes.
Write me a note.
Okay, I will.
I'll write you a note.
I promise I will write you a note. And you can write me back, but you don't have to.
I want
no
to.
Pressure. We can be pen pals.
Yeah, I made my kids study cursive because it's not taught in schools, and just because I know that it does draw some, again, that functional connectivity. In some, I'm going off topic, forgive me, but in some places, like in Europe, children have to draw these like circular movements before they can learn how to read, or they even do finger knitting to kind of help stimulate that area of language and spatial awareness in the brain. And it helps them. So even if they don't start learning to read, by the time they do learn to read, they have better comprehension than other students.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fascinating. Well, tell me a little bit about how connection through relationship or relationship conflict affects our physical health. You know, help me kind of connect those dots.
Yeah, it's so amazing how, from, you know, the time we're born through our whole life cycle, how our relationships with each other impact us so greatly. I mean, the field of psychoneuroimmunology. I said that word. I can't believe it. I always watch that word.
You totally nailed it.
has really been the leader in researching this. But so I have my notes with me today just because it's been a really long day. I love to speak off the top of my head, but I put my notes together from different writings I've done. But there was one specific longitudinal study that was looking at a heart attack. And it showed that even after looking at other variables, those who had less social involvement, so they weren't parts of groups or clubs or even not in a romantic relationship, had 1.5 times, they're 1.5 times more likely to have a first heart attack.
Wow.
I mean, that is a lot to say, so again, how much of that is the heart rate variability entrainment? How much of it that is the touch? We have these Pacinian corpuscles in our skin that are like these little orbs that when they're touched, especially when in an embrace, it releases oxytocin and serotonin, and it also vasopressin and calms our nervous system. Mm-hmm. So it's amazing how these, something mechanical like touch, but it has like a loving connotation with it, really impacts our physiology. Other studies have shown that pain is reduced when somebody that you have an empathic relationship holds your hand. So these were women in labor. And so they looked at women in labor who had strained relationship with their significant other and those who had really empathic relationship. And those who were holding their hand during labor with an empathic relationship had shorter delivery times and had less self-reported pain. And those that were in non-empathic or kind of strained relationships reported like greater pain. And I think it is so interesting. And it goes the same way with like hostility and aggression. A study that really spoke to me was it showed children who were like verbally abused, like verbal aggression, which is a form of abuse for sure. Mm-hmm. They had, throughout their life, they had much higher levels of inflammation and chronic disease and depression than those who weren't. But the interesting thing is when the same parent or another parent in the household used words of affirmation or affection, sadly, that did not overcome the effects of the aggression. Okay. Now, I wish there was a happy ending to that, but this study, I mean, I'm not saying you can't heal from that trauma, but the sad thing is that like if you have someone in your life that is offering the affection, if you're not getting that from a primary caregiver or somebody who is like the important relationship in your life, those adverse effects aren't really overcome. So that really speaks to how hostility and aggression really affect us. One of the ways, as you know, is through cytokine activation, and that lowers this enzyme called IDO that reduces tryptophan. And we know we need tryptophan to make serotonin. And serotonin, we think that it has a role in mood. I mean, that's how we look at it now. But serotonin has roles with like wound healing and bone formation and so many other things. So when we're looking at something that reduces our serotonin, we can't only worry about mood and, the effects of trauma, but also on our whole physical health. Yeah. I was so blown away, but not surprised by the recent study that was just released in December from Arizona State University. That's where I live, that showed that rats who had had their uterus removed had difficulties with spatial memory.
Oh, interesting.
And yes. And so really, I've said before that I think that I believe what Candace Pert said when she said our body is our subconscious mind. We are cognitive. We have cognition, not just in our brain, but in every cell in our body. We have immunological memory, right? I mean, that's what the premise of vaccines was supposed to do, right? Or when you're introduced to a pathogen, it's supposed to like remember that. And that's a form of memory. And so now we knew that like the ovaries were, had a communication system with the brain, just the way we know that other glands and stuff does. But these were people who just had their uterus, or not people, the rats who just had their uterus removed, but kept their ovaries. There was still a decline in spatial memory. So we thought that the uterus was just this, baby container. And now we realize, that so many parts of estrogen can be locally produced in the brain too. So it's not just your ovaries. So what I'm getting at in a very clunky way is that we assign these certain roles to different parts of our body, but really we still haven't scratched the surface of how our mind and our body is connected. And I really believe what Candace Pert said when she said your body is the subconscious mind. So of course, these, the aggression or affection affects our body in so many ways. And what's so interesting about the role of inflammation, I do have my notes here, but so inflammation causes symptoms of depression. But here's something that I thought was so amazing, that when in healthy volunteers, so mood is worse when we have these pro-inflammatory cytokines. Now remember, inflammation is not a bad guy. Inflammation is coming in there to save the day. It's like they're going, come on, everybody, let's get in there and get our work done, and let's build up this tissue or damaged tissue. What they did is they administered cytokines, endotoxins, and vaccinations in different groups of people. And this was a 2006 study, and it showed that that all caused depressive symptoms. So mood, depression, anxiety, and inflammation are so tightly contained together. They're so tightly interconnected. And so that crosstalk between your brain and your body and pain receptors, the only difference that your body really makes when you are in emotional pain from physical pain is there's other areas of your brain that are telling you where the pain is. So it's trying to send an inflammatory response to a specific area. When it's emotional pain, it's just generalized and widespread. And so I think that is so fascinating, because we look at certain autoimmune diseases or like fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, myelination disorders and things like that, that it just fascinates me, because again, that's the only differentiation that your body makes. It's like they both are sending the signal that something is wrong. It results in pain because it's trying to tell the body that something needs to be done. But with emotional pain, the only difference is it's not saying like, this is happening in my toe, or this is happening in my spleen or in my gallbladder. So your body just sends out these signals of distress, and it's not localized. It doesn't know really exactly how to deal with it. And I think that that's kind of an unlooked at avenue for some of these inflammatory diseases. I think your body is just putting out like all call for help.
Yeah. And I mean, as you're saying this huge light bulb went off. I'm like, yeah, because emotions aren't contained in one area of the body. They are in your cells, and your trauma, your memories, your emotions are in all of your cellular memory. And, we talk about cellular memory and kind of blow it off, but that's how you can get on a bike after not having been on one for 20 years and just go, pick the piano back up. And our body stores emotional memory in the same way, but you're right, it's not in this one place. And so it makes sense that more diffuse symptoms would be more probably, at least in part, emotionally related.
And that's what instinct is, right? It's like, I remember with my second daughter, I had heard that when you give birth to a baby, even when the baby can't crawl or walk yet, that it can inch its way up towards the breast. So I actually tried this with my second daughter. So I was laying there and I placed her low, kind of like low on my torso. And after like literally my milk had just come in, and she, minutes old, she wiggled her way up to the breast. It was just, it was so amazing and emotional to watch. But I believe that memory came from, my genes that were passed on from generation to generation, that we just inherently know how to do this. And I think we've all experienced or heard someone who like has had a massage and like began to cry.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's happened to you, but I remember the first time it happened to me. They were massaging, kind of the abdominal area. And I wasn't like sad or grieving anything, but I just suddenly started crying.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, there's so much biography in our tissues, and a lot of times I think when we don't want to look at that, or we don't think we have the time, or we're too scared, or we don't think we have what we need to deal with it, we push it away. And because our mind is chewing on something else, we assume it's been handled, but our body is really carrying that burden.
It's really true. Um, so I just want to really emphasize that when we experience these traumatic events, as you said, we do hold them inside of our tissues. And another way, because you gave a really beautiful example of if people don't quite connect the dots to that, or if they don't quite believe that, but our emotions are physical things. I mean, they are manifested as physical substances in our body, right? Our neurotransmitters create these peptides, and that's how our body, results in these emotional feelings. And so whenever something is just like, oh, it's just emotions, it's just stress, it's all in your head, it's like, no, I'm pretty sure that like different glands in your body are producing these peptides of emotion. Again, to quote Candace Pert, for people who don't know her work, she's now deceased, but she was the researcher who discovered the opiate receptor. And she discovered that the opiate receptor was not just in the brain, but it was in almost every cell of our body, or every organ in our body. And she really said that, so she coined these neurotransmitters and peptides as molecules of emotion. So she was the first to establish that there's actual substance that you make. So we're not talking just about ether. But then the energetic aspect of it is like, let's say you look at that in a microscope and you look smaller and smaller and smaller at what those substances are made out of, and you get to protons and electrons or quarks. It's like, it's so amazing because we are just energy, right? We're just energy, but also we are this is real too. So we have to pay attention to both.
Yeah. And I think the longer I'm in medicine, the more I realize that this brain is really a processing center. I think in Western medicine, we give this brain so much power, but really it's just receiving information from the heart, from the gut, from the gallbladder, from your skin, like you said before, with the touch. And really is just it's just a central processing zone, rather than the thing that's dictating. I just think it's receiving information and then relaying information. I don't think it's the center of our beings, like we have thought.
I would have to agree with you. And another limitation with all the research that's done on the brain is the only way they really know how to look at the brain's function is by looking to see what area lights up, right? So it's like looking at this myelinated nerve, this conduction, and it's really measuring like electrical signals. But that is just a small part of who we are as humans. I mean, it's a very important part, but there's a lot of ways that our brains and bodies work that we don't quite understand. I mean, think about how there's these distal communications. So you've got those, local areas in the brain that are talking to other areas, but we don't really understand how an ovary sends a signal, right? We don't really understand that at all. Like science can't explain that to us. Right. It can kind of explain like local synapse to receptor, but it can't really explain the other way. And I think it's so fascinating because there are some brain cells, like the glial cells, that they actually just circulate around your whole body. And again, Candace Pert, I just love her research so much. She believed that it was the glial cells that really were the connection between the body and the mind, and that they were kind of a mysterious but magical type of nerve cell in our bodies that didn't just stay in the brain.
Yeah. And it's just fascinating. What's cool is that there's more and more research coming out that's proving that these phenomenon are linked, even though we don't necessarily know how, which has been a big barrier in getting science behind what I think a lot of us intuitively know to be true, but maybe dismiss because it hasn't been medically or scientifically documented. But I'm thinking about two studies in particular, both looking at feeling isolated or lonely. And one of them was that women who were feeling lonely or socially isolated were 3 times more likely to have breast cancer metastasis as their counterparts who felt really supported. And that was, they, covered all the other variables that were going on. And the only difference was whether or not they felt socially connected or socially isolated. And that actually determined the stage of their breast cancer. I mean, and that's mind blowing to me. And then there was another study that just came out in the past couple of months and was saying that feeling lonely on a regular basis, like every day, kind of chronically, is as unhealthy for us as smoking 15 cigarettes a day, which is, yeah.
It is so sad. And a lot of those studies, it's based on self-reported loneliness, which is so interesting because, science, those guys, they want everything to be totally like blind, double blind, and have no like human component. But really, self-reporting is very human and very subjective. And I think it's funny because some of these studies, that's the only way that subjectivity is ever allowed.
Right.
And one of the things I love about naturopathic medicine is that it does allow for what the doctor observes.
Yeah.
I mean, some of it, like we have all these studies on green tea and turmeric, for instance, for like, helping to heal tissue, easing inflammation. But like grandmothers knew from all time and eternity in different cultures that was the case. And we're finally have a body of research to support that. But does that change the fact that turmeric and green tea have always been really good for us?
Right.
And it really saddens me when something is known culturally and historically to be healthy, but it's considered pseudoscience.
Right.
When you prescribe that or take that to action. I mean, people used to think that, naturopathic doctors since the late 1800s have been talking about them as the seat of immunity. And people used to think that was quackery. Now, like 100 years later, not everything like new in 2010, the gut microbiome.
Yeah, the microbiome. We have to, we can't say the gut anymore though. It's really funny.
I know. Yeah. Now, you can't just say
the microbiome, the microbiota. We'd have to make it sound more scientific, but it's the same thing that we've been talking about for centuries.
Something that drives me crazy about the biome talk now is that I feel like science is trying to find like, what is the strain that you need to give for this, this, and this? And it's like, that's pretty allopathic. Like your body needs different strains depending on where you live in the world, what types of food you eat, what pathogens you're exposed to. It's allostasis instead of homeostasis. Your body needs to constantly react. And I worry when we take something that's like natural and then standardize it. So it's like, again, trying to make it a one size fits all, like not a way to move towards health in my humble opinion.
Well, and I think that's a huge piece of this idea of self-care too, is that I think some of us feel like if we can tick the boxes, like, okay, I got my workout in, I took my supplements and I drank my green juice. Okay, I've checked those boxes. Now I can either do whatever or be as stressed out as I want all day or, not pay attention. But it's really, are we doing these things for ourselves in a loving way, in a way that's really caring? Or are we doing that just to tick the boxes and say, okay, I take care of my health, but not really slow down and pay attention and realize, what? Fermented foods make me feel really gassy and bloated, but they're good for me, so I'm going to keep on eating them. So, I hear that a lot, kind of this dismissal of one's own wisdom in favor of what the science says is good for you, or people who are miserable on these very complicated diets, which sometimes are required, but for me, I'm like, the stress and inflammation that comes from being socially isolated and stressed out every mealtime that comes around is not any better for you than just eating the pizza, or whatever. I think we have to put self-care in a larger context, that it's about what feels pleasurable and loving to myself today. And that might be very different than what it felt like yesterday. Yesterday sleeping in felt great. This morning getting up and working out felt great. It's not about what did I do. It's about giving myself permission to check in.
And I think when you speak of self-care, I think one of the real dangers we run into is this lie that we tell ourselves and each other that everything in moderation is good. I think that's a flat out lie, because what is available to us and when it's available to us is changing so rapidly. Like one example, let's say like TV or electronics. Like when I was a kid, like he was on like for the little kids, Sesame Street early in the morning, and then the afternoon, like 2 hours of like children focused programming, and then it was done. So it's like, unless you're going to sit there and watch like Bonanza and talk shows, you're outside playing.
Right.
Well, now there's a million channels on 24/7, and you can have this little thing, this palm of your hand. And so what used to be a few hours a week is now a few hours a day. Same thing with like there was a Starbucks in my community when I was in college. Or some friend and I would like once in a while drive all the airport. We have to park for all the TSA stuff and then get a frappuccino and be like, well, I'm never doing that again. And then a few months later we do it again, right? Well, now Starbucks where I live. And so people are lining up every morning. So now going to Starbucks once is moderate.
Right.
Twice a week. It's like, it's changed so much. And I feel it's a real ourselves and loving our by doing things we enjoy. But really love is looking at what's really loving to my body, what's love myself. And that's what my stance is on love as medicine. And secondly, we're always trying to find out the next guru, the next teacher, the next self-help book to tell us like how to eat breakfast, how to exercise, instead of like just looking within and looking at your own intuition. So another become disconnected from each other, mostly become really disconnected from ourselves. I have felt that in real ways. And when I've switched that, to really just listen within myself and really detox all these senses that we have, it's really been a real change of lifestyle for me, and it's helped me to achieve a lot more. It's never perfect, but I no longer am always trying to answers to things, and I really just listen to a lot more joy and health.
Yeah. I think that's great, because I think that you're so right, where we are very much looking outward for the answers. And I think we're also looking for the next thing that's going to help fix us. And that's inherently a problem when we are even participating in healthy or positive, activities. But if we're chasing those things in order to fix us, the message that we're sending back to ourselves is that we're broken and we're not okay as we are. And I think that's where we get to start. And that's what makes a huge difference when we're talking about self-care, because it's going to look different for me than it will for you. And it's going to look different for me yesterday than it did today. And giving ourselves permission to flow with that and trust that that intuition is going to lead us where we need to go.
Mm-hmm. When we think about study that just about your being involved in memory and cognition, it's like really get to know our bodies. Maybe there's to listen to that. There's ways to honor what every organ is speaking to. Like and many animals migrate. Science has discovered that there's this magnetic sense that these have that's due to this, in part, to this cryptochrome in their eye. And that is kind of how animals can detect fields. Someone knows exactly what they're surprised by, or a certain kind of tree because that's the kind of food they eat. So, we don't know answers, but do know that have this sense. And it was recently discovered that humans have all, and I believe that because we are always in electric light, because we are always distracted by electronics, I feel like we've kind of lost that sense. And I think that some of these really amazing senses, and just the normal, like see, smell, taste, touch, and hear, like we talked about the Byzantine corpuscles, there's also the opsin receptors in our skin that can detect light. And the words that scientists use when they study this is seeing, that you actually see certain links with your skin. So, it's like, look, we're thinking with our uterus, we're detecting water or food magnetically from our eyesight or location as we are in the world. We're seeing with our skin. To me, that's what intuition is. I think there's a lot more to it, but I think that if we can just get back to a more embodied way of living and try to get as many artificial things out of our environment as much as we can and still retain, our human luxuries, our modern day luxuries, I found it's a much keener way to get in touch with that interoceptive sense of really listening to what your body's telling you.
Yeah. Well, and you talk a lot about how intuition is the best way to experience love. Will you tell me more about that?
Yes. So when you use your own internal guidance system, all these amazing senses that we have, then you're always led towards the right decision for you. And that is how you experience more love. You have a better sense. Like, I've been working on my children with this, and it's been amazing. So my kids now, they really are in tune with how they feel after they eat or do certain activities. Like, I might allow them to engage in some electronics, and after a while they'll be like, oh, Mom, I need to get outside. Or we'll go for ice cream and my daughter will take a few licks and she'll be like, oh, my body doesn't want this anymore. And I didn't have that when I was a kid. Like, I had to develop that because of, making wrong decisions over and over again, whether it's with sleep or eating or relationships. And so when we get really in touch with that, we process intuition with what I call our three hearts. And it's the heart in our head, which is our brain, the heart in our chest, which is our heart, and then the heart in our enteric nervous system, our gut. And the reason why I call them three hearts is they're all organs of emotion. They're all endocrine organs. In fact, the heart was reclassified as an endocrine organ back in like 1982. I was so excited to see that research when I came across it. And when we are in this coherent state to where all of our senses are taking in all this information, and then our three hearts are aligned to process them, then I feel like we always have the answer. Now, it's really changed my life, but do I still make mistakes? Yeah. But I always realize that the reason is because I'm choosing my will over what my body is telling me. And there's always even when I fall or slip and make that decision anyway, and don't really follow what my mind is telling me to do, I learn the lesson. And then I can get back on the horse.
And learn it again. Because the mind is so powerful, right? We've given it, we let it wield so much power.
Yeah, it is. It is really powerful and amazing. And I think that, I think it's okay. I think it's okay that we sometimes don't listen to our intuition, but I think there's no way to fully move through the world in a way that's going to love ourselves the best, each other, and the world around us if we don't listen within. I mean, the reason why we each have our own internal experience is for a reason. That is the only thing that should guide us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny, I just feel like, when I was teaching this pleasure class a couple of months ago, and, and it was this really interesting concept, because it was like, well, is the chocolate ice cream pleasing to me? And I was like, well, sometimes it's going to be ego pleasing. Like, I don't want to deal with my emotions, so I'm going to do this instead. And so that's a certain kind of pleasure. But then there's like a deeper, like, is this really pleasing to me, or am I just using this as a distraction? And so I think we've kind of got to touch into these different layers, because I think that's where people get so caught in their heads around intuition. Well, I had this impulse to eat chocolate ice cream. Is that my intuition telling me that's what I need? And it's like, well, because our mind is kind of savvy and keeping our patterns and habits the same. Like, we're not going to feel into that. We're going to numb out in a variety of ways. And so I think it's really important to slow that down and really, kind of ask, is this nurturing or is this depleting? And if something's depleting, it's probably not your kind of inner wisdom. It's not your intuition. It's your mind taking on the voice of, guidance.
I like how you say that. Charlie Cropley, who is an elder in the naturopathic profession, he says this. He says, first, this is kind of common, ask your body, ask, how do you feel? How does my body feel right now? Like, how do I feel in my body? But then ask your body, how do you feel being with me? I mean, there's duality, but I think we don't ever look at it from the point of view. It's like, how do I feel eating this ice cream? But body, how do you feel that I'm eating this ice cream? I mean, it's just a subtle, neat little shift that he makes. Mm-hmm. I find it reminds me of what you just said.
Yeah, I love that. And Charlie is one of our speakers here too, so everybody gets to hear from him too, which is great, because he's got a lot of wisdom to impart around, because I think a lot of people want to take better care of themselves, but they get stuck or they get on a roll for a few weeks and then get derailed and kind of fall back into old habits and patterns. And I think that's really why we're coming together to do this series of talks is, how do we take care of ourselves more sustainably and more long term? And I as you're talking about the skin, I think a lot of people aren't touched as much as they would like. Maybe they're in a partnership that doesn't do a lot of touching, or not in partnership, or have some history of trauma where that doesn't feel real safe. But we forget that you can touch yourself, or caress your own face, and those receptors are still lighting up. It doesn't have to be someone else loving on you. And a lot of times we've got to remember that, you can't expect anyone else to love you in a way that you're not willing to love yourself. And so when we are willing to show up and take care of ourselves deeply, then we will attract people into our lives that see that and want to take care of us and are taking care of themselves too. So it's kind of this huge paradigm shift. But I think a lot of people that I hear from just feel like they keep on getting stuck.
I have a trick I'd like to share.
Please.
Hack is the word people use now, whatever, that help people listen to their body. So interoceptive sensitivity is the term that is meant to, like, how sensitive are you to listening to these kind of like organ, visceral signals and feelings that you have inside. And there have been some studies showing different ways to improve this. And I think it's a real key to harnessing your intuition. And I speak about that in the book that I'm writing about intuition. But some research has shown that people who engage in power posing have a better interoceptive sensitivity and sensibility. They're more aware of it, and they're also more able to use that. They're more sensible about it. They think about it more in their daily lives. And so I think the reason, and I'll tell you what some of the poses are, but I think the reason is because we've been taught not, to turn off a fever. We've talked about this before, to plug up the diarrhea, to the minute you're pregnant, you run to a doctor because it's a medical condition. It's like the baby has to have these checkups to make sure that they're like, okay. So we've been kind of taught to be afraid of our body. And so I think nobody knows why the power posing helped with interoceptive sensitivity and sensibility, but I think it's because just the way that, like, when you're happy or full of joy, you smile. But also because of those pathways, the neural pathways, you can also smile, and it does improve your mood to some degree because of that neural pathway. Well, I think power posing does the same thing. Mm-hmm. So one is you can kind of, sit back, put your hands back, put your feet on the desk, and it's just like the pose of like power and confidence, right? Like, I've got nothing to worry about. So that's one. Another one is standing with like tall, with your feet like shoulder width apart and your hands on your hips, like, I got this, So those are two really good ones that my daughters really like to do. Is it's like this superhero pose, where Um, so those are really fun to do. And so sometimes if I'm like trying to decide what to do, I'll do a little bit of those power poses,
Okay.
and then I rethink about it again. And so it's just stimulating that neural pathway, because when you are feeling confident and aware of yourself, you relax into those poses naturally, or you stand taller more confidently. So you can kind of rework that. And it improves that functional connectivity, which thus improves interoception. And I believe that improves your intuition.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Well, any other, I'm like, do I sound old? And I'm going to say tips or hacks for cultivating love and especially self-love?
Yeah, I just thinking about today because I saw my grandmother this weekend. She's 88, and
Oh.
she really taught me the value self-respect. And it sounds so like, she gonna get all like religious on me or something like that. But really, self-respect is something my grandmother taught me, that nobody can give to you, nobody can take away from you. When you take action in the world in ways that you feel like self-dignity, then it really cultivates this kind of confidence that it's not the same kind of confidence as maybe like, I definitely can work on my confidence, I'll say that. But I do have this quiet sense of self-confidence that comes from that. I did another podcast episode recently about our conscience, because our conscience is not this esoteric thing. There are areas of the brain that are kind of universally known to, I mean, there's some subjectivity here, but we kind of morally, I'm sorry, people don't like that word, but know like right from wrong. Like everybody knows, just like throwing like a paper bag out a car window is not the right thing to do, or taking something that belongs to someone else, whether it's in a tribe or at a grocery store, right? So we have this internal sense of right and wrong to a degree. And when you cultivate that within yourself, then it's almost impossible not to make choices for yourself or towards others that are rooted in love. I mean, nothing is fail safe, but it's kind of just like when you hold yourself accountable, it builds this internal awareness and self-pride that helps you through everything. And I think that's probably my number one tip for today.
It's perfect. That's great. Because I think that one thing becomes the cornerstone that holds everything else up.
Mm.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you so much for being with us. If
Yeah.
you want to hear some more about from Razi, she has a wonderful podcast called Love is Medicine. You can also find her online at thenaturalpath.com or the Nat Path, which is
Naturalpath.net.
naturopath.net. Great. Cool. Well, thank you so much. Appreciate it. We'll talk to you
Thanks,
soon.
everyone. Okay.
Bye.